Daryna Shevchenko is CEO of the Kyiv Independent newspaper. She worked for the Kyiv Post previously, that is an English language newspaper, until 2017. Following the invasion of Ukraine, the Kyiv Independent attracted 2 million followers and achieved tremendous success in crowdfunding to support its operations and its ambitious expansion plans. When Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, Shevchenko remained in Kyiv for a number of days and then moved west, but continued to lead the newspaper. The Kyiv Independent is notable for its fearless journalism and does not hold back from running corruption investigations and critiquing the government, even in time of war and when extraordinary pressures are being felt in a more hostile information ecosystem, especially with Russian propaganda rife as well. Daryna, welcome to the channel.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute delight. And of course, I am. This isn't the first episode we've done with a number of your colleagues and reporters. We've had Francis Farrell on, and we've had Zahar as well. And they've all been fabulous episodes. Let's
I'm
start then with your motivations to create something as powerful as the Kyiv Independent has now become.
I'm a big believer in journalism's mission to be the pillar, one of the main pillars of democracy, and I always wanted that for Ukraine. I worked with the Post, started there very young as a journalist and a reporter. Then I led one of the Post's NGO initiatives, helping other journalists improve their kind of journalism skills and develop and catch up with the rest of the world. And I've been in the media development for quite some time, so I'm kind of a journalism enthusiast myself. But I left the Post to move into management roles in the media. So I became a media manager shortly after I left the Post, and I led several newsrooms, several nonprofit media development organizations. And then when the Post collapsed and basically, went on the dark side, and the newsroom kind of left it and they wanted to start something else, I immediately reached out because I did have friends and acquaintances at the editorial team, and I offered them to help set up the Kyiv Independent. That was basically before like the tensions were already growing on the border. We knew that something was coming, and not having a strong independent voice of Ukraine was a very dangerous thing for Ukraine. I realized that, so I reached out, and then me and my partners at Genomics Media Consultancy, we agreed to partner with the editorial team of the Post to create the Kyiv Independent, and that went on very quickly. I had many motivations. My main motivation is, of course, to help Ukraine by creating this strong bridge between Ukraine and the world, that all Ukrainian stakeholders in different parts of the planet can walk. I always envisioned it as kind of, independent in all the senses, in terms of journals, but also in terms of how it's funded. And as a CEO, I work on the business side of things. So back in 2021, November 2021, when the Kyiv Independent was founded and we started the operations, my kind of goal was to make sure that it's sustainable, that we can not just continue doing it for like the next 6 months, but also that we're sustainable in the future. Still my main goal. I think now one other motivation I have many, I think. One of other motivations is professional. To me, Kyiv Independent is a huge professional challenge. It outgrown many organizations I worked with. It became more kind of modern in many senses. We experiment a lot. We are we're moving very fast to get things. We did adopt a lot of approaches in terms of how we do the journalism, but how we distribute the journalism, how we engage our readers and members, and we experiment a lot. And that's very interesting for me professionally. But I know also how important that is for Ukraine and to have this independent voice, especially now when my husband joined the army. And I know that how that fighting is really is happening. And I know that the support of the international stakeholders is needed, that we need. It's a necessity to have the world's eyes on Ukraine at all times. And it's becoming harder and harder to achieve that for some obvious and maybe some unobvious reasons. But yeah, these are my motivations.
And how important is it then to have that independent source of financing? Because, of course, prior to the full-scale war, oligarchic influence and in some cases control was still incredibly strong right across the media ecosystem. But it seems that oligarchs have lost a lot of influence, a lot of their role across the media environment. You have the centralized sort of governmental media structures that were built up, which popular at first but have lost interest. How important is it to drive, I would say, partisan moneyed interests out of the media environment?
Well, first of all, for the Kyiv Independent, relying on the partisan money was never an option. We were setting up this operation with the thought of we want to be financially independent, we need to be financially independent. We have learned from the mistakes of the Post, seeing how having even a good guy as an owner can turn against you just in 1 second, because that is depending on the will of one person, and that will can change anytime. So it was never kind of part of the plan or even an option for us. The Kyiv Independent was set up financially the way, we set up a very diverse revenue structure from the very beginning. So we need kind of an amount of money to move forward from this point zero to point A. Basically, and that wasn't even a point A we were at. So we fundraised with international donors, but we also knew we don't want to be fully dependent on international philanthropy, because that went away soon after.
I mean, that was a good decision, wasn't it? Because USAID issues have hit a lot of organizations and media organizations pretty hard.
That was a good decision. That was a decision based on my previous experience. I've read nonprofit journalism newsrooms, and that's not the way I wanted to go for many reasons. I'm not saying that international philanthropy is an evil way to fund journalism. It's not, but it's also nothing. It's not permanent, it's not sustainable, and it also makes you dependent on someone else's kind of strategy that can change any moment. And that itself depends on multiple different stakeholders that are involved in multiple different, very complicated processes that you might not even be able to track or predict and figure out your plan ahead of time. So I knew that we don't want to do that. So we, in parallel to international philanthropy fundraising, we launched our membership program on Patreon. When we launched our Patreon, we didn't even have a website yet. So it was, we're starting this media, and if you support the effort, become a member, we'll give you more soon. And I remember that it was kind of a very convincing thing we did for many also international philanthropists, because they were saying, okay, I also see kind of people supporting you, subscribing to Patreon, so there is interest, so we can give you money to kickstart. So that also helped that. One other smart thing we did, we also launched crowdfunding. So we launched a crowdfunding campaign, still open, in November 2021 on GoFundMe. There was a big debate, should we launch membership and crowdfunding at the same time? So wouldn't it divert attention from one another? But I strongly believe that we should give our community, our readers, all the opportunities to support us. We also started working with advertising. So we basically reached out to a lot of advertisers in Ukraine, kind of to introduce ourselves, but also to share the opportunities that we create with our new publication. And I have to say that that was going very well. But that died on February 24th, 2022. My initial business plan for the Kyiv Independent was that we will rely on advertising and international donors in like the first couple of years, then kind of having a small share of reader revenue in it. But the beginning of the full-scale invasion turned it all kind of upside down. So our reader revenue efforts started, bringing more and more fruit, and advertising market died overnight. The international philanthropy, some actually turned away from us because we had this reader support, and they're like, you don't need our support. Some actually stayed with us, but we never again fundraised for like institutional support. We only fundraised for the add-on project, something like we were looking for partners to do something cool together. And that's how we fundraise with philanthropy right now. Yeah, so now the Kyiv Independent business model is like 70%, like a bit less than that, like 68 or 69% reader revenue. And then the rest is different revenue streams. Now it's more than the ones I mentioned. So now it's advertising, syndication of content, it's book publishing, it's e-commerce. Yeah, it's kind of private fundraising. So we also fundraise with individual philanthropists. Yeah, all these things.
And how sensitive is it? Because, YouTube, which I operate on, has its own particular quirks and it's very reactive to what's going on day by day. The algorithm really rewards things that are happening in the moment rather than more long-term, in-depth, long-form content. Like the interview we're doing, I mean, this doesn't do nearly as well as people doing videos about what's happening on the front lines day by day and the incremental changes. But as the news cycle is, I mean, it's tumultuous at the moment. It feels like we're in a kind of fire hose of news, and that's making it more difficult, at least on my side, to sort of do in-depth materials. But how does that affect your subscriber base? Because you have moments where Ukraine is foremost in the world's media. So I think there have been two major spikes following the full-scale invasion. So there's February 22, then there's the Kursk incursion, then of course there's Operation Spiderweb, and these are huge, impact on global media. But in between that, it sort of declines. How's that had an impact on your subscriber base, or is it more resilient to the sort of peaks and troughs of the news cycle?
Well, I think first of all, there were way more spikes than that. Like, for example, one huge spike for us was the Oval Office meeting of President Zelensky and Trump. And that sent our kind of community through the roof. A lot of people started
A spike,
subscribing,
yes, but less controlling of the narrative than say Spiderweb. But yes, it's a
warning
big
us.
spike
I
in
mean, for us,
focus. Yeah.
definitely, it's the game of riding the waves. Like we need to maximize the effect of any spike there is around Ukraine, and we do that. So we have a great, like very flexible, very motivated, and very rigorous team of journalists and editors who do excel in the game of riding the waves. Kyiv Independent works in multiple formats. So we have everything from like two lines news item to a spot story to a like investigation, a report from the front line, video, audio, combined, a documentary, investigation with documentary. So we have news roundups, we have multiple newsletters, we work in a lot of formats. We also are present on all the social media platforms. I mean, maybe we're missing one, but even the small ones that came up after the Twitter decline, we're kind of on all of them. And we have a very good social media team that is working on that. So we adapt our content to the platform algorithms. We do it very kind of fast. I mean, and I think we get faster and better at it as we grow. So yeah, we do ride the waves. In between, our community isn't declining. I don't think there was, I think, one moment in our history that the community was declining. That was, well, May 2022, when we launched the community. A lot of people joined, but then we were kind of in a personal space, as everyone on the team was in a personal space where they were kind of fighting for their own survival and mental health, and we didn't pay much attention to that community. But when we turned back to it, it started growing, and it's been never falling since. So what was changing is the kind of how it grows. So for example, this last half a year was a very fast growth for us. So we started this year with 14,000 members or something around it, and now we're at 20,140 members, I think. And we've grown within like 6 months, riding different spikes, but also campaigning intentionally for new members and like doing all these things. However, for example, when we reached 10,000 members, I think it took us a year to get to 11 or something like that. So it was a very slow kind of stagnating phase for us, which was very hard. We had to reinvent our strategy around readers revenue and membership conversions and like our marketing plans. But we've done a lot of reiteration to sustain that. I think we never take a pause really around working around membership and reader revenue in the community. It is super important for us for the sustainability, but it's also like it is so important for us for the credibility to know that our community is growing, that these people are standing behind us, that they're supporting. They are an amazing community. It's a very uplifting group of people from all around the world who share a lot of good emotions with us, who are happy to help us with anything we come up with, to support us, to advise us on. A few community members actually arrived to Kyiv, and their connection with Ukraine is just us. But they risked kind of and came here and met us, and that was amazing. So yeah, community has always been a priority. The spikes never, I mean, they do affect the growth rate, but they never pushed us in the decline. The whole game of riding these spikes and the waves is exhausting. I have to say it is exhausting. But also we had that experience from 2014. So we kind of knew how the spikes would go and how the war fatigue would start settling in and what kind of tools and tricks we would need to have and then to invent to fight that. I think now the Kyiv Independent is growing. I think the reason for that are two things. First of all, the pie is now shared between less players. A lot of big publications internationally kind of reduced their coverage of Ukraine or gave up on it whatsoever. And all the people who are still loyal to Ukraine and the topic of Ukraine are still interested. They're coming to the Kyiv Independent, so we are able to grow the audience. The other reason for that is I think the Kyiv Independent's brand is evolving and developing greatly. We've done just recently a kind of a pretty in-depth research talking to our members and trying to find out why they are with us, what are their motivations, what keeps them in the community. And I think many of them identify themselves and their values with the values of the Kyiv Independent. And I think it is an interest specifically in us sometimes as well that is driving that growth. It's very hard to say what's the share between the two. I suppose the first one is bigger, but I think there's still that.
And of course, it's difficult in wartime, isn't it? Because doing hard-hitting journalism, which sometimes can be critical of government policies, not only is it difficult, practically speaking, sort of do that and not necessarily provoke a reaction from government, but also there are people who perhaps have a more, how should I say it, old-fashioned mindset that may see critical stories at time of war as being a form of disloyalty to the country. And yet, the impression I get from your colleagues is that actually The ability to run these stories, the ability to tackle societal issues and issues of governance are also, in fact, critical to the war effort.
I think our stand is we're in it for the long game, right? So, and we're also not a state propaganda machine. Like we're not a state project. We are an independent media company, and our goal is to tell the truth. Sometimes that truth is not pleasant, but that doesn't mean it's not there, and it's not us who are at fault. This is happening. We're just telling the story. We're just the messengers. There are very few hard discussions. I think we were the first Ukrainian media who actually broke the silence about the misconduct in Ukrainian army. We got a lot of backlash about that. We've got a lot of backlash for a few of our reports. I think it's never stopping us because our understanding is that we have to be truthful with us, but also with our readers for Ukraine. Like if we are building this partnership with the international stakeholders of Ukraine, we have to be truthful. Ukraine is great. It's amazing. The effort is amazing. The bravery of the people is amazing. The resilience of the country is just, but there are other sides to that story. And if we just, kind of deceive the audience or hide things from them, they are not going to trust us when we ask for help for Ukraine. And if we're playing the long game, then we have to build this trust and this relationship that is based on the truth. It's our responsibility. It's also how we see journalism. We can't be just one-sided. Also, like things gonna be solved after the war? No, they won't. We will have so much more things to solve. And if we don't start solving them as we go, we can't wait. We can't afford to wait for this, magical when the war ends. It might never end. Looking at how the world is reacting, it might never end. We might have to come up with something that will allow us to live and develop this in this state of things, which is horrific, but it's what it looks like. So yeah, we're not anything about things under the rug.
But that's an interesting attitude, and I don't disagree with that at all, of course. But the idea of building resilience, not just to tackle, kinetic Russian aggression now, but the understanding that this aggression, even if or when the full-scale war ends in whatever form that takes, that Russian aggression, sort of, hybrid or sub-threshold aggression is going to continue, possibly even escalate. That's fascinating to hear you say that because it still seems that in many quarters, including the media in the West, there's a sort of attempt to normalize these extraordinary things and a sort of implicit assumption that things will return to some kind of baseline of normality. That seems deeply delusional to me, but then maybe I'm the exception here. But you live with that, and you're having to build a publication predicated on that very idea that there is no return to normality.
Well, frankly, Ukrainians have always known that there is no return to normality. And Russia has been harassing Ukraine for centuries. It's not started even in 2014. If you go into Ukraine's history, in my family, in every generation, there was someone who was fighting Russians in one way or another. So for us, there's no question. Russia never goes back to normal. We have to fight for every day because Russia is the neighbor. And unless Russia is dissolved as a state, it is very unlikely that, and even if it is, frankly, all the things we've already lost in this war, it's not going to go back to normal. We lost thousands and thousands of lives. We lost infrastructure. We lost art. We lost heritage. We lost a lot of things. It's not going back to normal. This is the wound we have to internalize and then make sure that the country is still functional. I think the fact that the world is delusional like that is the huge risk to the world, less so to Ukraine, because Russia is not stopping at Ukraine. And if Russia invades Ukraine, even like bigger part of it or to the fullest, Russia is not like, oh, thank you very much, we just wanted Ukraine. It's not going to be that. Russia will go into Baltics, Russia will go into Poland. And I mean, I suppose it's pleasant to have that delusion now, but then what's the plan for the future? Like, if you're not seeing the enemy coming, how can you react to it properly? And Ukraine does see the enemy coming. Every Ukrainian knows this is like, yeah, the bigger, like the active combat might stop at some point. Even that is like, I'm not sure, but
And this is what Ukraine has. Ukraine has context. And I think every Ukrainian who I've spoken to has been on a journey, if they can remember back to 1991, a journey to relearn history, to learn some things that have been sort of suppressed or lost, whether it be family history, societal history. Almost everyone I've spoken to has been on that journey. And then you have Maidan, which is almost like a spark, which brings those things together and turns them into political organization, consciousness, and action. How important then is it in your journalism? And I'm going to explicitly make the comparison here with Western journalism, that actually you cannot just come like a tabula rasa to topics when it comes to, either geopolitics or Russia. You must come with context. You must come with an understanding of the history of aggression, the history of what that state is like and how it's structured and what it's done. Otherwise, you cannot function journalistically. And yet, compare that to many Western journalists who are sent to cover the story. It's not all, because there are some Edward Lucas, Luke Harding, and many others who are fantastic and have that context. They've gone out and learnt that context themselves or acquired it over decades. But many journalists are sent out with no knowledge of context whatsoever. And that is actually seen as an advantage by some of their editors and some of the journalists. Look, I know nothing. I'm not biased in any way because I have no context. That seems to me almost inevitably leads to very poor results in terms of reporting.
that's been our struggle from the very first days of the war. I think we should admit out loud that the world knew nothing about Ukraine before the full-scale invasion started.
Very little about Russia, unfortunately, as well. And what it did know was
I'll get to
slightly,
that. So the world has
skewed and
been
manipulated.
the world has been on the endless journey of trying to understand a mysterious Russian soul. And the world doesn't want to give up on this journey yet. And we've been doing our best to explain that as implicitly, as explicitly as we could to the world. That is a very big part of our mission. The context was missing so much that, I mean, I can tell you a couple stories. So I was in Kyiv in March 2022, like half March probably. And then there was a German journalist who called me, and it was around the time when the Russians hit the Zaporizhia power plant for the first time. And she was like, Daryna, are you in Kyiv? I'm like, yes. And she's like, did you know about the Zaporizhia power plant strike? I'm like, yeah. And she goes like, how did you find out? I'm like, from the news. And she goes like, but did you hear it? I'm like, no, it's 600 kilometers away from me. And then I realized that people didn't even know how big Ukraine was. And then the whole thing about Ukraine will fall in 3 days. You can get through Ukraine in 3 days without any resistance. Ukraine is a huge European country. When I first heard that, I was like, what? Like what? Who came up with that? That was the context. And that was the Russian propaganda manipulation. But I have to take some of the blame on Ukrainians because we also didn't try much. Like we did something, but Ukrainian propaganda machine didn't work much on building Ukraine's presence in the international space. Ukrainian media were always too poor to invest too much into that. And I think part of the responsibility is on us as well, that we came to this point and nobody knew shit about Ukraine. Nothing, like blank. And so we started telling the stories. We at the Kyiv Independent done a few projects of the historical overview and like explanatory journalism. And we have a project called Explaining Ukraine, which is like basically this set of evergreen stories about like this or that about Ukraine, right? But Russians have been investing in this image of Russia as the cradle of culture, of like big artists and writers, and all the mythology they have around it for decades and decades. They've invested millions, billions of dollars into the propaganda machine that works in the West. And it's like a lot of Western intellectuals believe that they are exempt, but they're not. Because Russian propaganda worked on many, many different levels. And it's not just stupid fake news. No, they planned very smart, very sophisticated false narratives that are very well kind of connect to your reality and stick with you, and then you repeat them and it just helps. And one of the stories I have is that I think it was 2022 or 23 when I joined an interview at one of the American press clubs. And one of the questions they had to me was, but part of what Russians are saying is true, right? So Ukrainians are like kind of punishing Russian-speaking people in Ukraine. And I'm like, how's that? And they're like, to get a Ukrainian passport, now you have to pass a language exam. I'm like, yeah, but wait a second, isn't that the case in any country? Our national language is Ukrainian. I mean, in France, you have to do a political exam, and that's okay. And then when Ukrainians require language exam, that's a problem somehow.
Well, you have English proficiency tests now in the UK as well, and it's considered perfectly normal. There's even a citizenship test, which I can guarantee most English people would probably not pass if they were forced to sit it.
Exactly my point. And then suddenly for Ukraine it's a problem. And that's definitely a Russian narrative. And it was planted very wisely in the heads of these Western intellectuals, manipulating different facts, twisting the reality here and there. And that's how Russian propaganda works. It's very expensive. It's a very expensive machine. It's been there for decades. We're not even nearly catching up with that. I mean, I do appreciate all the efforts of Ukrainian propaganda by the government. I think it had to be done a long time ago, but we're just trying to catch up slightly. And yeah.
Well, you've appeared at festivals, and one of the things I'm interested in is which Russian propaganda narratives cut through in different countries. And of course, there's a different scale of things. In Britain, there are certain narratives that still get repeated, but some of the more obvious ones don't work quite so well. But you've done various international German festivals, including Italy in Perugia. And unfortunately, Germany, France, and to an even greater extent, places like Italy, Greece, and so on, some of the more inane and ridiculous Russian narratives, they really still cut through and are still quite prevalent in the media. What was your experience then of doing these kind of international festivals and continuously having to fight the same battles over and over again?
It's been tiring. I think it's been personally my biggest challenge mentally. I've seen people tell me the most ridiculous things. I would probably be able to tell you the stories for like another hour because I do have plenty. Just once I was in Barcelona and I was getting a coffee with like some international people, and there was this American woman from Google, I think, who said um, something like, well, Daryna, I wanted to ask you, well, I mean, Ukrainians are very brave, but Russians are also dying. I'm like, what Russians are dying? And she's like, well, soldiers. I'm like, I mean, I think I lost it, frankly, at that point. I think I just stood up and left. And then a friend of mine from Slovakia was continuing that conversation. And I think it's on very different levels. So there is that. There is a group of narratives that I call humanitarian aid to Russia. So basically, these people who are like, there should be no war. Like, just don't give Ukraine weapons because it's like it's continuing the war. Like,
It's
the,
escalation, isn't it? Fighting back is
yeah,
it's
it's
part of the
all about
same
that.
sort of why can't you die more quietly, which
Yeah, yeah.
unfortunately cuts through a lot of international relations. They don't say it that way, but that's the ultimate interpretation of that.
It's very well. This particular kind of group of narratives is very well in Germany, I think. They are all about peace. And they kind of, but the war is bad. I mean, I once was in a very bad situation. I was interviewed by an Austrian publication, and then they somehow kind of, I don't know, shared that content with like a German publication that was very anti-war, and my quotes were like all twisted and turned. Um, yeah, like the headline was that Daryna Shevchenko says that Zelensky hates independent journalism. What? And then the kind of conclusion was, don't give Ukraine weapons. I was so mad. I was like, what? But this happens. I think it sits that very well in that part of the world. There is another category of this Russian narratives that come through. They're all about give money to Russian civil society so we can help this. But
Because
excuse
it's
me,
so effective, isn't it? It's,
of course. But excuse me, Russian civil society had 20 years to fight this off. 20 years. They've done very little. What makes us think that a new donation will do something? What are they even serving now? How is that? Like, I don't understand why people don't ask this question and they keep being fascinated by these good Russians, as we call them, which, by the way, are still kind of continuing the Russian imperial narrative. And the imperial narrative is Russians should be empowered. Russians should be, on top of the world. They are riding the stages of international conferences and gatherings like crazy. They are just, any conference I go to, there is always a Russian in the speaker list. And sometimes I even ask to share the stage, and I'm not doing that. I'm like, I'm not speaking to any good Russians. What do you want from me there? Like, do you want bloodshed on the stage? Not literally blood, you know what I mean. And we've had many situations. So there is that. There's Russian fascination, the endless journey to figure out the Russian mysterious Russian soul, the fascination of with the Russian culture, and here and there some of the Russian narratives about how Ukraine doesn't really have a culture, how Russian culture is much stronger, are planted when the truth is that Ukrainian culture is much older than the Russian one, and Russian one fed off Ukrainian culture for a long time.
and indeed,
Um,
one has to ask the question, what has happened since not just 1991, but since 1986 when perestroika first came up? How vibrant has Russian culture been compared to Ukrainian culture? I mean, I'll make an admission here. I went to Russia in the 1990s, I mean, to try and see whether an organic, strong, independent culture would emerge once communism came to an end. And I have to be honest, I didn't really see any evidence for it. There'll be writers here, writers there who, do interesting stuff, but there was no emergence of a strong organic culture or strong innovation at all. Most of it's derivative or won't stand the test of time. Whereas in Ukraine, that's the thing, that's the place I should have gone because there is clearly the emergence of a incredibly vibrant, strong, innovative culture that can weave, traditional themes with history and with, the ability to look forward. But why is that not? Why does that strong story that I've just painted there, why does that not cut through in the media? And it's the tired old, Russian great culture narratives that still dominate.
I think for the reasons I already mentioned, Russian propaganda is very well funded. It's been there for a very, very long time. They worked on that narrative like maybe for decades of centuries even, like as an empire, they had to like their only chance was to feed off different other cultures that they acquired, and then they made it look like their own, and like they, I don't want to go into like the deeper history lesson, but that's why. And I think culture-wise, Ukraine is doing much better than like other industries kind of wise. I think culture wise, we're getting stronger and we're cutting through and we're showing Ukraine from a lot of the different angles, but it's work in progress. We can't fight the billions of dollars and 20, 30, 50 years of work of Russian propaganda just in like 3 years. It's just not happening. So we are doing what we can, but that's not just the culture, that's not just the language. There are other ways they narrate, like one of the ways is actually not to is to dismiss Ukrainians as traumatized victims. That's what I've been told internationally many times whenever I decline to speak with the Russian speaker on stage, or you know give an emotional or like a very strong answer to a question around that. I am treated as a traumatized Ukrainian who just is just too emotional. She's just too emotional. It's probably something personal between them. And that is happening all the time. And I'm horrified at that. Like I'm not, I mean, I am traumatized, but I am speaking to you as an expert on Russia. I've been dealing with Russia as a Ukrainian my whole life. Before that, my parents have been dealing with that their whole lives. Before that, my grandparents. I have it. The information you need to understand your enemy. And that kind of dismissal makes them not see Russia as an enemy. I think I think that's like the most worrisome thing for me, frankly. Like we can fight all the narratives, but if they're dismissing what we're saying, I would tell them, guys, when I was born in 1989, my parents told all the relatives and friends that nobody's speaking Russian in my presence. I didn't hear Russians because of my parents' effort until I was 7 or something. Do you think that was for no reason? Right? I have the information. And because they dismiss us, and that's very easy to do because we are kind of in this space where we can be easily victimized, um, they just lose the information we can give them. They lose our expertise. I think there will be a day when the rest of the world comes running to us and just like, tell us,
What's
tell
the
us.
secret? How do we fight this barbarian
Um,
horde? Yes.
but the fact that they're still delusional is very, very sad.
And if we turn to the future, and that was going to be my question, which is obviously, like Kyiv Independent, other publications, other parts of the media ecosystem, yes, ideas have been sort of, borrowed and taken from some sort of, Western media environment, but actually you've innovated a lot locally, and you've innovated in a space which is a very hostile environment, a hostile propagandistic environment, a place of intense competitive oligarchy until recently, a place emerging from the Soviet space. And what we know is that the Soviet Union and the Russification, as it were, of societies within it was there to erode the trust between people, to erode the ability to organize and communicate and so on. So, the last question or the last area here is out of all of these things that have gone into not just the creation of the Kiev Independent, but a whole generation of Ukrainians, what would you want Western politicians, activists, journalists to get from Ukraine, to learn from Ukraine that can help reinvigorate, their own democracies, their own journalistic practices?
That's a very interesting question. I think there are a lot of things they could learn from us. I think our innovation, like our innovative approach to things and constant iterations, they're based on the fact that, well, our lives are threatened every day. Like we might not have tomorrow. If we want to do something, we're doing it today, right? So that's kind of the driver of it. We can't afford to take our time and like think about things. Other than that, Ukrainians are also very creative and like smart. And I think there's a lot of potential here. But what I would want the world to take from us is following the things, their names, is what Ukrainians do very well and what the world doesn't do. Like recognize Russia as an enemy to your security, not ours. We recognize it a threat to our security. Recognize it a threat to your security. Russia will come to your home, maybe not to the US, but it doesn't matter. They won't have to send their people to fight Russia. But it will come to your places. It will just name things what they are. I remember the beginning of the war, then everybody internationally, except for us probably, and maybe one or two more publications, called this a special military operation. What the, you know, can't you call the war, the full-scale invasion what it is? I think the world has to start calling things the real names. Otherwise, we make ourselves delusional and we are losing information and we are putting ourselves and our children and our future at risk. The other thing is that many of us made a conscious decision here to not just fight Russia and be constantly in the survival mode, but also to live a full life and create the grounds for our future while we don't even know if it exists. We decided to live a full life. We still invest in our business. New businesses in Ukraine come up, new traditions come up, new events come up. We do party together, we do live together, we get married, we have children, we build the infrastructure, we rebuild, we innovate. Because yes, tomorrow might not come for us, but what if it does come for us? We won't want to have this ground set for our future. We do believe in it. We do believe that we have all the rights to exist and all the rights to be happy. And we don't want to be just the victims. We are victims, but we don't want to be just that. And I think there are different parts to every situation you're put in. And I think the resilience of Ukrainians and this will to live and to develop is something that people can learn from us. I think the other thing is, well, the bravery and the resilience itself. Our enemy is so much bigger than us, so much bigger. And I think the meeting in the Oval Office was very representative of the popular thought, but in the world that, oh, what are you, delusional? Like, just give up. And we're not giving up. And we're not giving up because it's our home, but also every enemy can be fought. And every enemy can be won over. And we will win our struggle sooner or later. And you better believe in it. You better pick the right side. It's not always the biggest, the scariest guy who wins the fight. Sometimes it's the smartest, the most resilient, the most patient, and that's going to be Ukraine.
And the most innovative, as General Zaluzhny has put it many times in some of his sort of recent speeches. And we can see that in Ukraine over and over again. And we underestimate Ukraine at our peril. We overestimate Russia also at our peril. Daryna, thank you so much for speaking to me. This is absolutely fascinating. I'm sure we probably could have spoken for many more hours about the delusional nature of the depths of the Russian soul, but we'll have to carry that on in another episode. For today, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to mention that we actually have a newsletter devoted to that, and it's called "What the Fuck is Wrong with Russia?" And
I'm an avid follower of that.
my
I read every single one.
one of my favorite products in our history. So very much recommend. Thank
I will
you.
put a link in the description of the video. I think people, if they're not following that, it's a very important informational strand with a good dose of Ukrainian dark humor added in there too. For today, though, thank you so much. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!